Hey guys, how's it going? This is Seth here. I wanted to put together this quick review of the Breeo Luxeve fire pit. The reason I wanted to do this is because I couldn't find a really solid objective review out there on the internet that wasn't either hosted on the company's website or any kind of video that wasn't put together by the actual company themselves. And I actually could find plenty of reviews on their normal X series fire pits that seem to be a lot more popular, probably because they're not so expensive, but couldn't find much about the Luxeve. So I wanted to put together my own take on this. And also, just to be clear, this video is not sponsored by Breeo. I did not get this thing for free. I actually paid a boatload of money for this thing. So you can rest assured all of my opinions here are purely my own. It's not being reviewed by the company before I post it. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. The reason I ended up getting this particular one from Breeo is because I wanted one that had a really nice, unique, finished look like this. I really love the color options that they had on their website. I ended up going with the bronze vein color with the brown stone glass inside it. I just like that kind of rustic look to it, mainly because I don't want to have to be like polishing this thing and cleaning it all the time. I just want it to look good no matter what, whether I touch it or not. And I also really like the size of it. I noticed a lot of these smokeless fire pits are really small, but the existing fire pit that I had in my yard that I was replacing was about 30 inches in diameter. So I wanted to get one that was really similar to that, which this one was. And I think the number one reason why I picked this one and was willing to spend so much more money for this is because I have two small kids and I just hated the idea that they might like get too close to the fire or touch the metal and burn themselves. And I think I had seen from another review that the normal X series fire pits kick out a lot of heat from the sides, like even more so than a normal fire pit would. And I just wanted to have that little protection just in case, heaven forbid, if some little kid, be it my own or another child, were to go and touch the sides of it, it would be okay. And on that note, I am happy to report the outside surface of this thing remains very cool enough to touch it while the fire is blazing hot. I don't really know if that's like a recommended thing or not, but I tested it out and for me it was still cool to the touch even when the fire was going full blast. And actually even the stones on top are pretty cool to touch as well. It doesn't really get hot to the point of burning your flesh until you start touching that inner ring. And also on that note, because of this, just something else to be aware of is that when it has this buffer ring around it, that also means that this probably isn't going to radiate as much heat from the sides as the normal X series would. This one did not seem to kick out a whole lot of heat directly from the sides. You have to have your hands over the fire. That heat isn't really going to be coming directly from the sides. And this could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you want. For example, if you're trying to have a fire in the middle of winter and you want this to heat out from the sides, it's probably not going to do that well, as I discovered in this scenario when I was trying to use it when it was cold out. But if you're trying to do this in the middle of the summertime when it's already hot and you're not really doing it for the purpose of warming up, but maybe like doing s'mores or cooking food or something like that, then that could actually be pretty good because you don't necessarily want to get sweaty and hot just because you're trying to cook food. And this thing will basically just keep that heat radiating up instead of out from the sides. In terms of setting this thing up, so it comes in a huge box on a pallet, which obviously takes up a fair amount of space, and it's pretty easy to figure out where everything goes. I think there were 4 different components. There's this outer metal ring, and then there's the inner portion, which pretty much makes up like 80% of the material, the actual fire pit itself. And then there's the bag of rocks that you sprinkle in the tray that goes around it. And that's actually one thing that I didn't realize until I got this, that the rocks don't go all the way to the bottom. There's actually a pretty shallow little tray that they sit in. It's purely for looks and the aesthetic, but it does look pretty good when they're in there as long as you don't knock too many of the rocks off, which is actually a fairly easy thing to do. I found when you're throwing wood in the fire or just moving it around, it doesn't take a whole lot to knock rocks out of that tray, whether they fall out of the fire pit altogether or even into the fire pit while you're having the fire. I think it's a little bit harder to knock them into the fire pit because of that inner ring that kind of acts as a safeguard. but it's a lot easier to knock them out. And that was something that kind of caught me by surprise that I was a little bit disappointed in, because I don't want to have to be constantly picking up rocks and putting them back in here. It's almost like required maintenance to keep this thing looking right. So I'm guessing at some point I'll probably have to order replenishment rocks from Breeo just to fill this thing back up again. That's just how it works with this design. So it's just another thing to be aware of. And then the fourth component is the metal lid, which has a little handle on it that you have to screw into it with 2 screws, but it's super simple. simple. In terms of just figuring out how to set it up, you don't really need instructions for it at all. It's very simple and straightforward. But because of the weight and the bulkiness of this, it's kind of a two-person job unless you're a pretty strong person and you're pretty confident in yourself. So I was able to do it all by myself, but with a little bit of difficulty in doing that. So just keep that in mind. If you get the smaller ones, then it's probably not necessarily a two-person job. I think my favorite thing about this fire pit is just the way it looks. It looks really impressive, at least in my opinion. And in terms of the smokeless nature of this fire pit, is it really smokeless? Well, I think if your wood is wet or protruding above the rim at all, then no, it's not going to be smokeless. And that was actually the case with the first couple of fires I had with this fire pit. The wood was wet and there was way too much in there, and yeah, it wasn't really smokeless at all. But if you can get that wood even remotely dry and keep it beneath the rim of that fire pit, then yeah, I think for the most part, you're not going to see a whole lot of smoke. But I think it is worth mentioning just because these things are marketed so hard with that smokeless keyword. And just be aware, if you don't feed it the right kind of fuel, it's not going to be smokeless. And I'm not an expert on the science or the engineering behind this design, but my understanding is that with this smokeless design, it means the fire gets a lot hotter because it burns off some of that smoke. And in some ways, I think once you do have a fire going, it's able to burn wetter wood a lot easier just because it's so hot. But this thing is not magic. It's not any easier to start the fire. You still have to follow the same fundamentals. It's not like any kind of wood is just going to explode in flames when you throw a match in there. You still have to know how to start a fire the normal way. And as for the price of this thing, I can't really gloss over the fact that it's expensive. And for what it is, I mean, it may be a tad overpriced, but at the same time, it's definitely a unique fire pit. Like, I don't really know of any other place online or a store where you can buy a fire pit that looks this good and has that smokeless design to it. So would I recommend this thing? I think I would for a certain kind of person. If you've got plenty of money to spend on this kind of thing and you want something that looks beautiful and catches the eye, it really does kind of look like a piece of art in a centerpiece for your yard that just looks really nice. But if you are on a tight budget, obviously there are much less expensive options out there for you. So those are my thoughts and impressions. Hope you found that useful. And if you end up getting this fire pit or anything else from Breeo, I wish you all the best. Thanks for watching.